I think that one of the things I did right is that I recognized pretty early on that I couldn't do everything and that I needed to build a team around me. One of the things I tell entrepreneurs all the time is that growing a business is a team sport. You might start it out as you as the creative genius who came up with this product or service, but you really need to let go of that idea that it's about you.
Welcome to Season 2 of the Growth Trust podcast series. In today's podcast, we focus on the skills and strategies needed to take startup businesses to the next level. Over the past decade, Australia has invested heavily in building a vibrant startup ecosystem. But all too often, these startups stall after an initial growth phase. Their CEOs often end up feeling lost and overwhelmed. It's one of the reasons behind what's been dubbed the missing middle of our economy. We currently have 2.5 million small businesses with between 0 and 19 employees. They represent more than 97% of all Australian business. This stands in stark contrast to the mere 2.6% of medium businesses with up to 200 employees. So how can we help business and startups become part of the mighty middle? With me in the studio is a growth expert who knows a thing or two about transforming startup businesses. Sarah Curtis-Fawley is a dual citizen of Australia and the United States. She's worked with dynamic companies in both countries, and we will learn much more about her amazing journey in the coming half hour. Also with me in the studio for this valuable conversation, the Director of the Australian Centre for Business Growth, Ryan Williams. So, Sarah Curtis-Fawley, tell us a bit about your story. How did you first come to be here in South Australia?
Sure, thank you. So I grew up in the US. I went to school at the University of Virginia and studied psychology and criminology. And I had the opportunity in 2001 to come to Australia on a Fulbright fellowship. It's actually a bit of a funny story how I ended up in South Australia, because my fellowship year was with Griffith University in Queensland. And so I was originally meant to spend my whole year in Queensland. But about a month before I was coming over, the professor I was working with contacted me and said, we have an opportunity to do some really interesting data collection in Adelaide. So we want you to start your year in Adelaide. I literally had to pull out a map of Australia and go, where exactly is Adelaide? I'd never heard of it, to be honest, but I think it's one of the, best happy accidents of my life, because I am now one of the biggest advocates of South Australia. I think it's a fabulous place to live and work.
So you were working for the Social Inclusion Unit within the RAN government at the time?
That was after my Fulbright year. So
Yep.
I first did a year of research, and then I loved Australia and a particular Australian so much that I stayed in Australia beyond my year and then started working for Department of Premier and Cabinet and Social Inclusion.
And then you leave the Social Inclusion Unit, you go back to the States, and you take with you some ideas that you've gleaned from South Australia for a very successful business. Tell us about that.
Sure. So I moved back to the States in I think it was 2009. And my Australian partner at the time got very homesick for meat pies. As I was saying to you before we started recording, I was kind of young and naive enough to think, sure, I can start a business doing that. So we relocated to Oregon and started a business selling pies at local farmers markets. And before we knew it, it had become quite a sizable enterprise. So we operated hospitality venues where we had kind of pie cafes and Aussie-style pubs. And then the biggest part of our business was a wholesale manufacturing facility where we made our own products, but then also a whole range of baked goods for grocery stores and other kind of retail outlets.
So you're making pies, sausage rolls as well?
Pies, sausage rolls, pasties,
Wow.
Custard tarts, vanilla slice,
All these things you've gleaned
all the favorites, yes.
and that grows into a big business which you eventually sell, and then you come back to South Australia.
Yes. So we grew that over about 9 years, and then for various reasons, decided that really wanted to come back to Australia.
Yeah.
So got the business ready for sale and sold it successfully. And then, came back to Adelaide.
Well, Ryan, I can see why Sarah is a growth expert, because this is a classic story, isn't it? It's not it's not necessarily about expertise in any one field. It's about knowing how to grow a business regardless of the market that you're in. It's knowing how to grow that business and create what we want to see in Australia, the missing middle that we talk about.
Yep.
I can understand why, you wanted to speak to this amazing
the other thing I think that's interesting about Sarah's story, like so many great entrepreneurs that you meet, is that happy accident moment. And the way you describe quite casually, my partner at the time was a bit homesick for a pie, and I thought, oh yeah, I'll give that a go. I recall when we started Nota Bene, that was a discussion around, here's an opportunity to create something because the market's underserviced in terms of strategic skills. So, build something that's differentiated. And I think all of those, I had a conversation recently with somebody in government who was talking about, what are your top 2 or 3 box items that you think are the most frequent things you'll come across that hamper growth? And I would probably, reflecting on this, say the number one thing is the shift from product to customer mindset is probably the biggest box for me. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff, obviously. Leadership capability is a big one, but if you don't obsess about what customers value, it's difficult to scale a business. And all of these happy accidents, when you listen to people tell the stories like Sarah just did, you kind of can hear that's a customer need that you were filling. And a customer-led mindset. And it so happened that you made pasties and pies and vanilla slice and other things, but that's to service a particular customer need. It wasn't about the pasty per se.
No.
Although it's interesting though, isn't it? Because you talk about, you're focusing on the customer need and you've got to get that right. But this is a case where the customer doesn't even know that product exists until you start making it. So how do you tap into that understanding the customer need in a new market?
Well, I think that to start out with, basically every expat, for many states around us found out about us. So, people from Australia, New Zealand, the UK, South Africa, all the kind of like pie eating countries were so excited to find us. I mean, we would have literally people who would plan interstate trips to come see us and bring these like huge eskies and buy hundreds of dollars worth of pie.
Oh, that's great.
So originally kind of that was our entry into the market. But I was just thinking when you were talking about, Ryan, one of the things, again, that became one of our keys to success is, so we used butter in our pastry.
Yep.
Most large-scale bakeries use hydrogenated fats because they're much easier to deal with. And most manufacturing equipment for bakeries is engineered to be able to use hydrogenated fats. But I really held firm, no, we're going to use butter because butter is delicious and makes a superior product. And also I was listening to our customers like Whole Foods. So we sold into Whole Foods, the upscale grocery chain in the US. And they were really looking for products that were natural and using high quality ingredients like butter. So, the intersection of those things as well kind of gave us that differentiation and allowed us to serve that customer niche.
So how did you grow this business from you and your husband working on a very niche product into a much bigger product? How did you grow that into what we would call the missing middle that we see here in Australia, where so many people in SMEs are worn down by the process of developing the business? They start with enormous passion, but later on they feel lost and bewildered. How did you deal with those issues as you grew your business to this missing middle?
I mean, look, I wish I had known then what I know now after having, I did my MBA after I sold my business. And then since then have worked with so many companies to help them scale. And I've learned so much along the way that I wish I could have told myself back then. So a lot of battle scars.
It's always the way.
It is the way. But I think that one of the things I did right is that I recognized pretty early on that I couldn't do everything and that I needed to build a team around me. One of the things I tell entrepreneurs all the time is that growing a business is a team sport. You might start it out as the creative genius who came up with this product or service, but you really need to let go of that idea that it's about you and build a team around you.
Yeah.
And so I did that early on and really invested in that. And this is another thing that I think I did right. I spent money that I didn't necessarily have, but I found it, through taking on loans and, from my mom and whoever would, maxing out credit cards. But I realized that to grow my business, it's like, I remember playing Monopoly as a kid, right? And it's always like, you got to spend the money to buy the hotels so that you can collect the rent when people go land on your space. Same thing with a business. Like,
so you got to be prepared for risk.
You got to be prepared to spend the money in the right ways. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And can I, for you, Ryan, I was just going to ask, as far as the centre's concerned, these are the sorts of things that you really want to hammer home with South Australian SMEs.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So that leadership journey that Sarah was talking about, I joke often with the odd occasion when I get to work with an entrepreneur about how I used to believe that there were only two ways to do anything, the wrong way and my way. And my life changed the day I disavowed myself of that notion. And so I think that's the second bucket when we spoke earlier about the customer obsession. The second bucket for me is always about your maturity as leader to kind of get out of the way. So I'd frame it for folks about, are you in control enough to let go? Assuming that you want to build something that scales. I recognize and acknowledge that there's a cohort of business owners out there who are quite happy running a lifestyle business. But if you have ambitions, anything beyond that, sooner or later, you've got to compensate by having a wiser and more broadly skilled team around you, because you're not going to be an expert in everything, no matter how good you think you are. Actually, can I just riff on one of the things that you mentioned that I thought was interesting? You spoke about doing your MBA after you grew the business, but if I recall, you'd said to me that you'd done an iteration actually of the program that we do at the centre. You'd done the US version of this.
Yes.
Also by Jana Matthews.
Yes.
When you were building your business in the States. Is that right? It was one of those serendipitous ways that we ended up being connected with Sarah out here.
Explain to our audience, Jana Matthews,
she was the founder of the Centre for Business Growth.
Yes, and looking at exactly these sorts of programs.
Yes. And Jan is originally from the US as well and worked for the Kauffman Foundation, which is all about promoting entrepreneurship and business growth in the US. And so when I was about 5 years into my business, I was feeling quite out of control because all of a sudden I told you before we started recording, I think I had about 60 people working for me. I didn't even know all their names anymore, practically. I felt like the wheels were about to come off of this very fast moving train. And so I looked for something to help me and found this program through the Small Business Administration in the US called Fast Track. And it was a 6-month program that kind of helped you really understand your business, where your business is headed, what your end game is. And it was actually through that program that I identified, I think I want to get this business ready for acquisition. I don't want to do this forever. I've got other interests in my life and probably want to move back to Australia. So so that program ended up, that was created by Jana Matthews as well. So
you needed some sort of organizational chart in some way to map out the future.
Well, I needed a plan. Like I had no plan. We were just growing, and we see that all the time with the businesses that we work with. And
then you tap them on the shoulder and you kind of say, "It's great that you've grown. Do you know how you got here?"
Yes.
And there's sort of a shrug and a bemused, like, "Oh, we're quite happy that we landed here." But the challenge with that is then it's not replicable. If you don't know what made you successful and you don't know what hurt in equal measures, that you're unable to then build something that you can kind of, roll on from there.
So we're looking at delegation first up, knowing when to sort of let go and hand over to other people, the ability to raise finance and to take that risk to grow accordingly, to have some sort of organisational structure and get some mentoring or a course in some way that's similar to the ones that your centre offers, Ryan. What else does a business person need to grow that business to become, the missing middle that we lack here in much of Australia?
Well, I think part of it is a mindset. It's like, we're talking about risk, right? And growing a business is, a risky proposition in a lot of ways. And so it's that mindset of, having the right kind of ambition and understanding why you want to do it, really articulating that so that you can bring your team, along with you as the leader. I think that's one of the most challenging things, but one of the most important things.
So how did you go about getting the right people in place then? I mean, all of this is new to you in many respects. How do you decide who's the right person to take over that aspect of the business, who's the right person to take over distribution, all that sort of thing?
Well, look, there's a lot of trial and error in there and learning along the way. But again, like what I know now, it's about being really clear about roles and responsibilities, what it is that the business needs. What is it that only you can do as the CEO or the owner? And then what are the things that you can delegate? What can you contract out versus bringing in a full-time resource? So there's lots of elements there. But again, this is where having really good advisors or mentors or, engaging in a program where people who have been there and done that and walked that road and can provide their advice is really helpful.
Do you think it's easier to raise the capital that's required to grow a business in the US than it is here in Australia?
I mean, look, anecdotally and from my own experience, I would say, yes, it is easier in the US. Look, the US is a much, much bigger market in all ways. And so there's more of everything, including business finance.
which brings me to a question I wanted to ask you, Ryan. I noted that, you were a mentor for businesses overseas. And in one particular case, I think there was a moment where you sought some crowdfunding for a particular business to help them grow. You've got to look at different ways of seeing, capital raising in some way.
Yeah, I think the crowdfunding thing was actually a business that had come through
the center.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As opposed to something that I was doing internationally.
Oh,
but
okay.
Yeah, I think that there are different lanes for particular things. I mean, direct-to-consumer products typically work better in that crowdfunding circumstance than businesses that aren't. So I've seen companies be successful in the crowdfunding environment where it's not just about the capital raise, but it's also like an advanced marketing program for them.
Mm-hmm.
So the business that I was thinking about, we were on, Sarah and I actually worked in that cohort together. Mm-hmm. They work in the alcohol sector, premium brand, and ended up recruiting a whole bunch of new
brand
customers and brand ambassadors through their crowdfunding program. So not only did they get income coming in the one side, but also advocates for their products. So I think it works in a particular set of lanes. I don't think it's for everybody. And there's such a diverse wave of financial options out there. Ultimately, if you try and bake all of that down to its essence, it's either you're going to sell somebody a piece of your company to get cash, or you're going to borrow the money from somebody. Those are the only two proximate things. Using leverage or debt versus equity fundamentally talks to what type of organization you're trying to build and what your long-term plan for the business is. So Sarah said, having a clear picture of what the end game is may well change the nature of how you choose to fund growth in business. Sorry, can I just go one? Yeah. Sarah was talking about, you'd asked the question, Ron, about how you know who to hire and so on. And I recall, I actually think it was you as well in a session that we were doing together, Sarah, where you'd suggested to a company, I overheard you talking about, what is your org chart? Have you designed your org chart for each of the next 3 years? Even though you don't know, you may have empty boxes because you haven't hired for that role yet.
Yeah.
But having the discipline to say, this is the type of company I think we're going to be in 3 years, and therefore we'll need all of these positions filled, starts to give you a clue as to, well, which ones do you need to hire first?
Yeah.
And which are the critical dependencies for you to meet your growth? Because that was a fantastic insight that you'd shared.
Well, it also, I think it allows you to recruit higher quality candidates, because if you can show them, this is my vision, and in 3 years, this is what our organization is going to look like, and I potentially see you here, not here, it gives them, ambition to come along with you.
And of course, that's great for funders.
Yeah.
So there's a number of folks that I'll meet with, they'll come back and they'll say, the banks won't give us any money. And I'll normally start with sort of a gentle conversation around, so have you got a business plan? No. And then you hear kind of silence. Yeah. So, well, if somebody's going to loan you money, they need to know what you want to do with it, right?
So that's probably just hear passion.
That's probably the first thing.
Yeah.
So have you got a board or an advisory board or something like that?
Yeah.
And again, silence. And so, well, somebody that gives you money, whether that's equity or debt, probably wants to know that there's a governance structure that makes sure that the money is well taken care of.
Yeah.
Not just because they think you're a great person. And then, the next question after that is, have you got a a shareholders agreement with yourself and the company, and then there's silence again. So these are all really simple things you can put in place that are actually holding you back from being able to get that finance.
Right.
And so having an org chart would be one of those artifacts where you're able to say to an investor or to a bank or a lender or whoever, you know, here's my vision for the organization. Here's the plan to get there. Here's what the future org chart is. This is what I'm going to use the funds for. You know, this is what we think the milestones of success will be. That's a much more believable story for somebody to give you some cash as opposed to, hey, I've got a cool idea. Do you want to give me some money?
Yes.
That may work in the beginning with your family or, you know, what we call in investor circles, we call it friends, fools, and family, the three Fs, the early investors.
So what is the problem here in Australia then when we look at, currently we have 2.5 million small businesses with between 0 and 19 employees. They represent more than 97% of all Australian business. You compare that to the mere 2.6% of medium businesses with up to 200 employees. So there's this huge gap from people who start off with all this passion, you know, an idea, but they don't seem to make it to that next level. What is the problem here in Australia with the missing middle?
Well, we only have half an hour here today, so there's so much to say about that. Look, I mean, I think access to growth capital, definitely, but what Ryan has said is very true, that you can't just walk into a bank and expect them to write you a check. Like, having the discipline to have that plan in place will ultimately get you a better result, whether it's with equity investors or debt. I also think there's this kind of fear for a lot of growing businesses of getting over to a certain number of employees because, you know, we call it the compliance cliff sometimes. Like, you know, if you grow over to a certain number of employees, all of a sudden, like, you know, your health and safety obligations, your payroll obligations, your fair work obligations, all of that. When I talk to entrepreneurs, I hear a lot of fear around all of that. And so it's like, well, we'll just kind of stay under this number of employees. So I think that's something maybe from a broader level that we need to kind of have a look at.
So government policy has a direct bearing, the level of bureaucracy, red tape.
I mean, compared to like when I ran my business in the States, and, you know, it was some time ago now, but I'm often like quite shocked by the compliance burden on businesses here in Australia. It's quite time consuming and expensive, frankly.
Does the centre give a lot of advice about, you know, that sort of thing as well? You know, getting advice about compliance and how to grow your business?
No, I mean, we're not sort of we're not the regulatory experts. We're focused on how do we help you grow your business. But we're savvy enough across the collection of fantastic entrepreneurs that we get into the room to work with the businesses to be able to say, hey, listen, when you get to this point over here, you probably need to go and get some specialist advice for these things. In the same way as we would never provide financial advice around whether debt or equity is the right option for your business. But what we will do is describe, you know, here are the pros and cons and processes by which these things happen. And you need to make a decision as to what, you know, your mileage may vary, what suits your organization. And then from there, you know, haul out the phone book. I used to say the black book or the Rolodex, but, you know, these days pick up your phone and help refer folks on to other institutions or specialists that can help them in those spaces. Because I think there's an aspect of, we'll have another podcast talking about what happens in regions. I was recently down the Limestone Coastway and talking to an entrepreneur down there, very successful. And I said, what would you say is a barrier here in doing business in regions? And the answer I got back was, you know, we work really hard at some of the stuff, but we don't have access to great professional resource. So high grade finance capability, high grade marketing capability, and so on, is quite scarce in region. You find that in the capital cities. And so just us having the ability when we're in the room with businesses to be able to say, here's a really good advisor for this, here's a really good tax person for that, here's a really good marketing person for X, Y, and Z, I think is very helpful for entrepreneurs to help navigate where they can land. The other thing I'd make the comment on the missing middle piece is so many, I mean, we work with probably 150 to 200 businesses a year, give or take, at the centre. And I'm always gobsmacked at the number of those businesses that don't come in with a plan. And so if
the vast majority of them,
regardless of the regulatory piece, because I think there's a headspace issue in there as well. I understand that there's a fiscal impact that you deal with when you cross a certain threshold, and you've got to now program for all these things, kind of like running a retail business. You'll be more profitable in your first 3 to 5 stores than you will be when you're at 10 to 15 stores, because you've got all of this overhead that you need to bake in order to be a scalable organization.
Yeah.
And so you'll find folks that are in retail, in physical retail, kind of have a great journey, then hate their business for a bit, and then have a great journey again on the other side. And I would view that regulatory burden in the same way, to say, here's a set of hurdles. That's a headspace thing.
It's a mindset.
If you're programming for growth,
Yeah.
you'll be able to see a cash flow cycle that takes you past that hurdle and look to the fields on the other side. So, yeah, a headspace shift to say, I'm either opting to stay small and therefore have a lifestyle business, and that's a cultural thing, or I'm going to push through and build something, because we have mega organizations in Australia. How did they do it?
Yeah.
Of course, they pushed through.
Yeah.
And the last point I'd make, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I think that in many environments here, I see folks where it's a scrabble to protect the slice of pie, whereas in markets like the US, there's we'll just make the pie bigger. Yeah, sorry, I shouldn't have probably have used pies given.
No, perfect. But yeah, they just grow the pie and just make the market bigger. Yeah. Did you find that? That there's a different attitude?
Look, we call Australia the lucky country for a reason. Like, we live in a beautiful, protected in many ways place where, we've got beaches and fishing and lots of great things to do. And so sometimes I think there's this attitude of like, I'll do it tomorrow because I'm going to go to the beach today. Whereas like, I think that, because maybe we don't have as robust a social safety net in places like the US, there's more of that kind of entrepreneurial spirit baked in, from earlier age. Like, if you want to get ahead, this is one way to do it.
Yeah.
So I think we need to find ways to celebrate our successful entrepreneurs more in Australia.
Well, one thing I'm picking up on the point about headspace for entrepreneurs. Australia's productivity growth has slowed despite Australians reporting they are working longer hours. Counterintuitively, one solution to the problem is for business maybe leaders to focus not on day-to-day operational activities, but instead to create more space, or slack time, if you like, to allow for business transformation. Do you agree with that? You've got to carve out some spare time to think about, where am I? How did I get here? And where do I want to go from here?
I mean, absolutely. One of the things we talk about in the center through all our programs is innovation. And sometimes when people hear the word innovation, they immediately think about, tech entrepreneurs or things like that. But our view is that if you want to continue to grow a business and grow sustainably over many time horizons, you need to bake a innovation function, into what you do. We could go on and on about how you do that, but one of the ways to do that is to create some slack. So some kind of play time, some dreaming time, some, brainstorming time, rather than just being in the weeds of day-to-day ops all the time.
So rather than just being on the treadmill running the whole time,
exactly.
You've got to take some time out to think about what is the road ahead.
Yes. And I think, as the leader of a business, as your business grows and evolves, that becomes one of your really important contributions to the business, kind of that chief innovator role, like really always looking ahead at what's over the next, horizon for your market or your industry, and, immersing yourself in adjacent industries and looking at, macro trends and what's happening on a global scale, rather than just, being head down in your emails all the time.
So what would you say to a young entrepreneur watching this podcast and thinking about, what do I do with my business now that I've grown it to a successful small enterprise, but I want to take it to the next level? What are some of the lessons that you have learned about taking it to that next level?
Build the right team, get people around you who can help you lead the business so that it's not all on you. Get good quality advice. So seek out mentors, advisors in your industry, but I also would say not only in your industry, because you need to kind of diversify what you're exposed to, and realize that it is a marathon and not a sprint.
It's not going to be a straight line run.
No.
That idea of having a bit of slack time or space in your business, that's sort of another working on the business rather than in the business piece. I think that certainly for me and a few other folks I've chatted to, I found it personally quite confronting when I went through that change in my professional career, because everything that I thought that I did that added value was suddenly no longer required. And it was a very weird experience, kind of, sitting at my desk going, well, now what? I've done the 3 meetings this morning, and I've been through my mail. And what am I doing for the rest of the day? Yeah, I think for some folks, we don't talk enough about how that can create a crisis of confidence in leaders. So part of our role in this environment, or what I would view our role, is to help folks see that that's coming down the pike and to help them prepare for that, and to help them understand that actually now you're going to add a whole different layer of value for your organization that hitherto was untapped because you've been so much on the tools and so heavily invested in that day-to-day. So I think there's some of that, I guess, the psychological experience of growing a business that we don't. I don't recall reading a textbook saying, by the way,
yes,
this is going to happen on Tuesday, kind of like, and just kind of getting ready for helping folks get ready and deal with and process some of those things.
Now, I'm sure viewers of this podcast will want to know what next for Sarah. I mean, you started with social inclusion, the South Australian story, went back to the States, have come back. What are you working on at the moment, and where are you going in the future?
Well, I always wear lots of hats because I have many interests. So I work as a growth expert for the center, which I really, truly enjoy. I do a little bit of teaching in executive education at the University of South Australia. And then I've just recently started a role as Chief Growth Officer for a business based in Darwin, who we actually first met because they came through the center. First met them about 5 years ago.
Not May Pies.
No, M&J Builders. So we build buildings.
It shows you that it's not necessarily about the product per se. It's about the thinking about the market and how to grow it in the long term.
Yes, exactly.
Sarah, thanks so much for your expertise today. It's been a fascinating story.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for your company today. If you'd like more information about the issues raised in this podcast or other related topics, please visit our website at www.centreforbusinessgrowth.com. And a quick reminder that you can always tune into the Growth Trust podcast on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Bye for now.